Jordan Peterson has spent years teaching people how to face pain, tell the truth, and carry suffering without breaking. But behind the lectures, heated debates, and public image, his hardest battles were not only on stage, they were inside his own home. At the center of that story was Tammy, the woman who knew him before fame, before headlines, and before millions judged every word he said. Their marriage survived illness, fear, pressure, and years that could have torn them apart. But when pain returned to the family again, it exposed something deeper than controversy. It showed the private cost behind a very public man. Join us as we uncover Jordan Peterson, Tammy, their private health battles, and the painful truth behind the tears no lecture could explain. How did a boy from Fairview become so hard to ignore? Jordan Burnt Peterson was born on June 12, 1962, in Edmonton, Alberta. He was the oldest of 3 children. His father, Walter, was a school teacher with Norwegian roots. His mother, Beverly, was a librarian at Grande Prairie Regional College. Jordan grew up in a mildly Christian home, but faith was not simple for him. As a teenager, he even decided that religion was for people who were weak, ignorant, or superstitious. He was also drawn toward left-wing politics. From the ages of 13 to 18, he was a member of the New Democratic Party. He became friends with Rachel Notley and her family during junior high school. Years later, Rachel would become the leader of the Alberta New Democratic Party and Premier of Alberta. But his early beliefs did not stay fixed. As he moved into college, he met activists who changed the way he saw politics. The young man who once hoped for a left-wing revolution began asking harder questions about power, belief, and human nature. After Fairview High School, he entered Grande Prairie Regional College in 1979. He studied political science and English literature and thought about becoming a corporate lawyer. But one book helped turn him in another direction. George Orwell's The Road to Wigan Pier affected him deeply. It pushed him to think harder about class, politics, suffering, and human stories. That early shift matters because Jordan Peterson's whole life later became a fight over meaning. He was never just studying facts. He was trying to understand why people believe what they believe, why they follow dangerous ideas, and why whole societies can lose their way. Long before cameras and crowds, he was already wrestling with the questions that shaped his public life. But while his mind was chasing big questions, the most important relationship of his life was already waiting across the street. The girl across the street who never really left. Jordan first met Tammy Roberts when he was still a child in Fairview, Alberta. His family lived across the street from hers. Years later, he shared that he was about 7 when he first knew her, and that they had an awful lot of memories together. Tammy was not someone who entered his life after success. She was there before the books, before the lectures, before the protests, and before the cameras. They played croquet as children, and they grew up in the same small northern Alberta town. Fairview had fewer than 3,000 people, so life there was quiet and familiar. Tammy later remembered sitting with Jordan outside Fairview on a hill where they could see far across the Peace River. There were strings of lights in the distance. In senior year, Jordan was her graduation date. After high school, life pulled them in different directions. Jordan went on with his studies, and Tammy later pursued kinesiology in Ottawa. Still, they kept in touch. Their bond did not vanish just because they left the small town behind. They reconnected in Montreal, and before they married, Jordan asked Tammy if she would commit to telling the truth. She did not answer lightly. She spent a year thinking about it. Then she came back and told him she was ready to build a marriage on truth. They married in 1989. That detail says a lot about them. Their marriage was not presented as a fairy tale built only on romance. It was built on a promise. Truth would matter. Staying would matter. Tammy later said that when she got married, she decided she was going to stay no matter what. She took her vows seriously. And as their life moved forward, that promise would be tested in ways neither of them could have imagined. The student who was obsessed with darkness. After his early college years, Jordan transferred to the University of Alberta. He completed a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science in 1982. Then, he took a year off and traveled to Europe. That year became important. He began studying the psychological roots of the Cold War, 20th century totalitarianism, and the works of thinkers like Carl Jung, Friedrich Nietzsche, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, and Fyodor Dostoevsky. He He was not just asking who was right. He wanted to know why people could become captured by ideas so deeply that they would defend cruelty, lies, and mass suffering. He returned to the University of Alberta and earned a second degree, this time in psychology, in 1984. The next year, he moved to Montreal to attend McGill University. There, he earned his PhD in clinical psychology under Robert O. Peel in 1991. He then stayed as a postdoctoral fellow at McGill's Douglas Hospital until June 1993, working with Peel and Maurice Dongier. His research focused on family alcoholism and related problems, including childhood and teenage aggression and hyperactive behavior. These early academic years show why Peterson later spoke so often about chaos, order, responsibility, and the danger of belief systems. He was looking at the human mind from many sides. He studied politics, literature, religion, personality, addiction, aggression, and family pain. At home, he and Tammy were building their own family. Their daughter, Michaela, was born on January 4, 1992. Their son, Julian, was born in 1993 and later kept a much lower public profile than his father and sister. But family life was not untouched by struggle. Michaela suffered from juvenile rheumatoid arthritis as a child. At 17, she needed a hip and ankle replacement. So even before the world knew the Peterson name, pain had already entered the house. Jordan was studying suffering in books and clinics, but he was also seeing it in his own family. That private pressure later became part of the story behind his public voice. The Harvard professor who built a quiet following. From July 1993 to June 1998, Jordan Peterson lived in Arlington, Massachusetts. He taught and conducted research at Harvard University as an assistant professor in the psychology department. By then, he was not only a serious scholar, he was also becoming the kind of teacher students remembered. Author Greg Hurwitz later said Peterson inspired him. Psychologist Shelley Carson, a former PhD student who became a Harvard professor, recalled that Peterson's lectures had something like a cult following. She said students cried on the last day of class because they would not get to hear him anymore. That kind of reaction says something. Peterson did not speak like a dry academic reading notes. He made ideas feel urgent. He spoke about meaning, danger, belief, and responsibility, as if those things could decide the course of a life. In 1998, he returned to Canada and became a full professor at the University of Toronto. His interests covered many areas, including psychopharmacology, the psychology of religion, personality psychology, and political psychology. For most of his career, he also kept a clinical practice and saw about 20 clients a week. In 1999, Routledge published his first major book, Maps of Meaning: The Architecture of Belief. In it, Peterson explored how people build meaning, form beliefs, and create stories. He also looked at how belief systems can lead people and groups into social conflict and into atrocities like the Gulag, Auschwitz, and the Rwandan genocide. The book showed what Peterson had been chasing for years. Why do people believe? Why do they fight? Why do ordinary people sometimes defend monstrous systems? These questions were not distant to him. They shaped his lectures, his writing, and his later fame. But for years, that fame was still limited. He was known in classrooms, clinics, and academic circles. Then the internet opened a door, and everything began to change. When one public stand changed everything. In 2013, Peterson registered a YouTube channel called Jordan Peterson Videos. At first, he uploaded lectures and interviews. From 2014, he posted recordings from 2 University of Toronto classes, Personality and Its Transformations, and Maps of Meaning: The Architecture of Belief. They were long lectures about psychology, belief, personality, and human behavior. But people watched. By March 2016, after 3 years of uploading course videos, Peterson announced that he wanted to clean up the old content and improve future uploads. Then came the year that changed his life. In September 2016, he released videos criticizing Bill C-16 in Canada. He said he opposed compelled speech and would not use preferred gender pronouns if he felt political force behind the request. Critics said he mischaracterized the law and helped create a climate of hostility toward transgender people. Supporters saw him as a man standing up for free speech. Almost overnight, he became a symbol in a larger culture war. Tammy later described how sudden it felt. Jordan came downstairs one morning and said he could see deep trouble brewing and felt he had to speak publicly. Tammy told him he had been talking to her about these problems for 30 years, so maybe he should tell everyone and see what happened. That afternoon, reporters were in their kitchen, in the study with Jordan, on the porch, and waiting in cars outside. They thought it would stop, but it never did. Their home had become part of a public storm. Peterson kept teaching for a while, but everything was now up in the air. His clinical practice became difficult to continue because he could not concentrate the way he had before. Tammy was at home, listening, helping him think, and trying to keep some peace inside a life that no longer felt private. One night, someone even pushed over their garbage cans, and Tammy simply yelled, "God be with you." It was almost funny, but also unsettling. Their quiet home had been pulled into something much bigger than a debate, and once that pressure entered their front door, it did not stay outside for long. When Jordan's fame became Tammy's burden too. By 2017, Peterson's public world was moving fast. Donations for his work rose sharply through Patreon. He hired a production team to film his psychology lectures at the University of Toronto. His lectures and online projects gained a much larger audience. In May 2017, he began The Psychological Significance of the Biblical Stories, a series of live theater lectures that were also released as podcasts. He analyzed stories from Genesis as patterns of behavior that helped explain personal, social, and cultural stability. What surprised many people was the crowd. Tammy traveled with him in 2018 and also attended the Bible lectures. She remembered people lining up for blocks to hear him speak for hours. Many were young men. She often went anonymously and sat in the crowd, helping with practical things so Jordan was fed, rested, and ready to speak. She also talked to people, including protesters outside. Some were outraged, but could not clearly explain why they were there. Inside, others seemed to be searching for guidance, courage, and common sense. In January 2018, Penguin Random House published Peterson's second book, 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos. It discussed self-help ideas in a more accessible style than maps of meaning and appeared on several bestseller lists. Suddenly, Jordan was not only a professor with online lectures, he was a global speaker. He appeared on podcasts, shows, and major interviews. In December 2016, he had started the Jordan B. Peterson podcast. In later years, his work moved through platforms like Westwood One and The Daily Wire. But fame did not arrive alone. It brought criticism, pressure, and constant attention. For Tammy, the boy she had known since childhood, was now watched by millions. Their family had been pulled into a debate that never seemed to end. And just when that pressure felt heavy enough, a far more personal crisis arrived. The diagnosis that shook the Peterson family. Before the health crisis, Tammy Peterson had lived a much quieter life than her husband. She had run her own massage therapy business for about 3 decades before stepping back to support Jordan's work and act as an advisor. But around 2015, her own health began to change. She later remembered severe arthritic pain, and by 2017, the pain was so bad that she could no longer walk up and down the stairs. A scan found a shadow on her left kidney. The first biopsy showed renal cell carcinoma. Doctors first believed it was not usually fatal, but after surgery, the news became far worse. A second biopsy showed a Bellini tumor, a rare and aggressive form of kidney cancer. The doctor called Tammy and Jordan into his office. His hands were shaking as he gave her forms to sign for another surgery. He told them the cancer had gone into her lymph system and that they needed to act quickly. Tammy was told she might have only 10 months to live, and the survival chance seemed hopeless. Jordan and Tammy were shocked. Yet the moment that truly changed Tammy came when she went home and told her son, Julian. She saw deep grief in his eyes. In that instant, she understood that it was not only about her dying. It was about a son losing his mother, a daughter losing her mother, a husband losing his wife, and a whole family facing a hole they could not fill. Tammy later said she felt the weight of the world lift from her shoulders. She told Julian, "Only God knows when I'm going to die." The doctor had an opinion, not certainty, so they would go forward with gratitude for each day they had together. That was the beginning of a surrender that would change her life. Inside the hospital room, where fear turned into faith, Tammy had surgery, and doctors removed her kidney and lymph tissue on one side. At first, it seemed to go well. Then her feet began to swell. Fluid was leaking through her body because the lymph system had not healed properly. She went back to the hospital, and doctors drained 9 liters of fluid from her body. A nurse came every day to drain more. She was told not to eat fat, to give the lymph system a chance to rest. She lay in bed, eating mostly vegetables and trying to recover. But her vital signs weakened. Her blood pressure became hard to read, and she went back to the hospital again, this time through emergency. Doctors feared her electrolytes were so out of balance that she could have a heart attack. She was moved to the ICU, then placed in her own room. Tammy thought that was not a good sign. To her, privacy meant the doctors might not know what else to do. Then her friend Queenie emailed and asked to visit. Queenie came with rosaries, a picture of the Virgin Mary with baby Jesus in an Asian form. She said the rosaries had been blessed by the Pope. Tammy said yes to praying the rosary, which surprised Queenie. They went to the hospital atrium, a place with trees and benches that felt almost like being outside. Queenie taught her the joyful mysteries, then the sorrowful mysteries, then the luminous and glorious mysteries. What began as a visit became a daily rhythm. Queenie prayed with her for 2 hours every day. Tammy prayed for family first, then for all sick people, all old people, and others beyond herself. She cried for her father, her sister, and the people she could not help. Prayer did not make the pain disappear, but it held her steady. The anniversary no one saw coming. As Tammy fought for her life, Jordan was suffering too. The stress of her cancer battle was heavy on him. He had already dealt with depression and had been on antidepressants for many years. During this period, he was prescribed benzodiazepine medication to help with anxiety and sleep. Tammy later said Jordan was often in her hospital room, sometimes sleeping in her hospital bed when she returned from praying the rosary. She could see how much he was suffering, and that pain weighed on her heart. She wanted to give him hope. So she told him that she believed things would be solved by their anniversary in August. At the time, it was not a medical promise. It was a word of comfort from a wife to a husband who looked broken by fear. But what happened next was hard to ignore. Doctors in Canada could not find the source of Tammy's lymph leak. She traveled to a hospital in Philadelphia, where a doctor named Max Itkin said he would find it. After one procedure, they still could not locate the leak. Another, more invasive surgery was planned. Tammy had not eaten normally in weeks, but she learned that if she ate fat and the drainage bag stayed clear, it could mean the leak had closed. So she tried a fat challenge herself. The next morning, medical staff came to test her, and she told them she had already eaten fat. The bag was clear. They accepted that the leak had closed. Soon, she was out of the hospital. When the family reached the Airbnb, they realized it was August 19th, their anniversary. Jordan later said her survival was very unlikely, but the fact that she had predicted the timing of her recovery was much harder for him to wave away. When Tammy's recovery turned into Jordan's nightmare. Tammy's recovery did not mean the family could breathe easily. Almost immediately, Jordan's own health crisis deepened. His daughter Michaela later said he suffered horrific discontinuation symptoms from clonazepam. After Tammy's condition improved, he tried to wean himself off the medication, but the process did not go as planned. Michaela described him as like a lost puppy and said she had never seen her father like that. It broke her heart. In February 2020, Jordan entered an emergency detox center in Moscow after struggling to stop the medication. During that time, he suffered severe pneumonia and was placed in a medically induced coma for 8 days. Michaela said he spent 4 weeks in the ICU in terrible shape, but survived with help from competent and courageous doctors. The uncertainty around his recovery was one of the most difficult and frightening experiences the family had ever faced. Tammy later explained that his trouble did not only begin with benzodiazepines. She said he had gone off antidepressants too quickly after being on them for many years, and that this seemed to destabilize him. Then more medication complications followed. She described the brain as delicate and said people must be careful when coming off such drugs, slowly and under medical care. For the Peterson family, this was not an abstract debate about medicine. It was lived pain. And when the worst finally began to pass, survival was not the end of the story. They still had to find their way back to each other. The marriage that had to learn how to dance again. Tammy later said that when she and Jordan came back together after their illnesses, everything had changed. They had both been through the ringer. They did not even know whether their marriage still made sense, but the things they had practiced were the things that survived. One of those practices was date night. After their first baby, they had built a tradition of making time for each other. Jordan once described the goal of marriage as the perfect date that repeats itself endlessly. So when they were both still fragile, they tried to have a date again. They did not have to ask how to do it because they had done it for 30 years. Tammy would get ready. Jordan would make sure the room was tidy, the pillows were fluffed, the candles were lit, and the music was on. He joked that he would turn on the lasers, referring to their old laser lights from the 1970s. They played songs from jazz classics and the Great American Songbook. Then they danced. It was not dramatic, it was not a cure, but it was normal, and normal mattered. That moment told them their relationship had survived. Their marriage had already lived through their daughter's childhood illness, Tammy's cancer, Jordan's crisis, fame, criticism, and public pressure. Tammy said their own health problems could have pulled them apart, but they did not. They decided to stay together and support each other through thick and thin. She later said their relationship became better, deeper, stronger, and more of an adventure than ever. Jordan connected Tammy's search for faith to the truth vow she made before they married. He said it was an extension of that promise. To him, if you love someone and they are trying to aim up, you are happy about that. But Tammy's path was still becoming more public, and it soon brought her into the Catholic Church. How Tammy's pain led her back to God. In 2023, Tammy spoke about entering RCIA, the process of becoming Catholic. She said she had just started and planned to officially enter the church at Easter. Her journey had come full circle in a strange way. She grew up with Protestant influences. Both of her grandmothers were connected to church life. One played piano in church and the other sang in the choir. She also remembered a Polish Catholic great-grandmother who carried a rosary every day. But as she grew older, formal faith slipped away. In college, she found reasons to stop going to church. Later, illness brought her back to prayer. Queenie's visits in the hospital had taught her the rosary, and Tammy kept praying it after leaving the hospital. She said the prayers sustained her. She would wake at night and pray the Lord's Prayer until she fell asleep again. She did not allow herself to worry. In 2024, on Easter Sunday, she was officially received into the Catholic Church. She described the day as joyous and said she felt relaxed, accepting, and surrendered. It had not been her plan, but it felt like the next right step. Faith changed the way her family saw her. Her children told her she had changed and had become a delight to be around. Later, she said she and Jordan made a list of virtues that had appeared since her conversion. She described herself as more fun, less cynical, less controlling, more patient, kinder, warmer, more present, more compassionate, more willing to listen, more precise with her words, more creative, and more courageous. Jordan also saw a change. He said she was less troubled in her soul and had recovered something like the state of childhood Christ connects with the kingdom. Because he had known her as a child, he could see that part return. The Petersons were still carrying more than people knew. Tammy's faith did not remove every hardship. It changed how she carried them. In 2024, Jordan publicly promoted her podcast and told women, especially young women, to consider listening to it. Tammy's podcast focused on motherhood, marriage, family, faith, boys and men, education, gender, health, and the pressures of modern culture. It gave her a public voice of her own. Around the same time, Jordan continued working on religious themes, including his 2024 book, We Who Wrestle with God, Perceptions of the Divine. He had long wrestled with belief. In 2017, when asked if he was Christian, he said the most straightforward answer was yes. When asked if he believed in God, he gave a more complicated answer. In 2025, during a viral debate with atheists, he refused to identify simply as a Christian, which surprised people expecting a clear label. That tension was part of Jordan's public image. He spoke deeply about the Bible, but often through psychology, symbol, and meaning. Tammy said she did not fully know where his journey was headed. She said Jordan was watching her and saw the changes in her up close, even if he could not fully explain them. Their daughter Michaela also moved closer to faith. Tammy said Michaela called her before Easter and said she was going to be baptized on the same day Tammy was entering the church. For Tammy, that felt like an answered prayer because she had long carried regret that her children were not baptized when they were young. But family life remained heavy. By 2025, Michaela shared that Jordan had been near death while battling pneumonia and sepsis. She said he had dealt with unexplained neuropathy and weakness for years, and that doctors believed chronic inflammatory response syndrome from long-term mold exposure played a role. The family leaned hard on faith, but the worst updates were not over. The health update that left the family shaken. By the spring of 2026, Jordan Peterson's private battle had still not let go. Michaela Fuller shared a detailed update and said the past year had been unbelievably hard. She explained that her father was suffering from complications linked to an older neurological injury, which had recently brought back akathisia. She described akathisia as extreme physical and emotional distress with an intense need to move. In her words, it was the worst thing she had ever seen anyone go through. She said he had worsened over the last few months, and the family delayed speaking because talking about it added stress. She was 25 weeks pregnant and said she had not been able to record anything without weeping until that week. She also said her brother was stressed, her mother was stressed, and the whole ordeal was affecting many people. Jordan had also battled pneumonia and sepsis during the same crisis, making everything even more serious. Michaela stressed that this was not from new psychiatric medication. She said he had not been on psychiatric medication since January 2020. Instead, she believed stress, family losses, relocation, and environmental factors may have helped trigger the flare-up. She also said the condition had been misdiagnosed many times, which delayed proper help. Now that they knew what it was and had doctors who understood it, she had cautious hope. She said there was light at the end of the tunnel, but healing would take time. For Jordan, the man known for speaking about suffering, the lesson had become painfully personal again. For Tammy, the wife who had once faced death and found peace through surrender, this was another painful test inside the same marriage. So what part of Jordan and Tammy's story stayed with you the most? Tammy's fight for life, Jordan's painful health battle, or the way their marriage kept surviving? And do you think suffering changes a person forever, or does it simply reveal who they really are? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more incredible stories from Hollywood's fascinating history. See you next time.